So we've talked about inflation a couple of times here. I don't think I've ever spoken about how it's actually calculated. And I'll do my best to explain it in a not super boring way. So there's this thing called the Consumer Price Index, which you might have heard me mention before, or CPI for short. Think of it like this imaginary basket of goods that holds a bunch of stuff that Canadians want and need inside it. Now, how the price of that overall basket of stuff changes is inflation. So for instance, if on January 1st you could buy everything in that basket for $100, and then on December 31st of that same year, all that stuff would cost you $102, well, then inflation was 2%. Now, the way it's mostly spoken about is like on a monthly basis year over year. So for instance, the monthly rate for September that just passed was 6.9% year over year. So what that means is in September of 2021, this basket would have cost you, let's say, $100. And then in September that just passed, the basket would cost you $106.90. So just under $107. Okay, so what's in the basket, you might be asking yourself? Well, it's actually broken down to a lot of different categories. So shelter, food, recreation, all that kind of stuff is in there. There is a complete list on the Stats Canada website if you actually want to go check. But now everything in this basket isn't equal. It's all weighted differently depending on, its importance. As an example of that, if rent goes up by 5%, that's going to mess you up a lot more than if the price of bread goes up by 5%. And the CPI even takes shrinkflation into consideration in the calculations. So making sure that we get the same amount of juice in a juice box for the same price that we always have. In fact, the big one was shrinkflation that happened a while ago. Remember how you used to get an actual pound of bacon? Now you get 375 grams, which is not a pound. And when people found out, they lost their minds, which I don't blame them because bacon is fantastic and you want as much as possible. And even stuff in the basket changes over time as we kind of don't use things as much anymore or use things more. Sometimes things come out of the basket, sometimes new things go into the basket. In fact, after it was legalized, weed was put in the basket. Yes, the price of pot has an effect on inflation.